Hello, I'm Stephen, this is Mick, and today we're going to be talking about the topic of rebooting society. Before we begin, we just want to say that this is only a discussion. There are no right or wrong answers. These are just our thoughts and opinions which can and will change. Neither of us are experts on anything. We are just two dudes talking. Okay, I do that disclaimer before each video, but in this one we really want to highlight again that this is only a discussion. So we were going over this a bit yesterday, discussing the podcast, what we would talk about, and we realized we could go down a road where we're like, we don't necessarily agree with where we ended up, and we'll go back. And so we just wanted to highlight this. This really is just a discussion and our thoughts and opinions. So you never know where it's going to go. Just keep an open mind when we say something, oh, let's try this, let's try that. They're really just suggestions and just thinking it out. And that's kind of what we want to highlight with this podcast as well, is whatever topic we're discussing, that's really unimportant. What we're trying to get at is, how do we approach discussing things? How do we approach discussing various topics, various issues, and trying to figure that out together and figure it out with the audience, with you guys. So that's really, we just wanted to put that up front just to make sure that, okay, if it seems like when we're talking about this is how we would build up society, we're going in a certain path that historically has turned out poorly, we may realize that a bit later on and then have to backpedal. That's perfectly fine. This is just a discussion, no right or wrong answers. Mick, you got anything that you want to add to that?
Yeah, no, I agree. It's not about the solution. We're not saying that this is a solution. We're presenting a discussion and about how two people would actually, in this case, how we can navigate complex topics like trying to reboot society. And if we end up somewhere, then we can actually ask the questions, okay, well, that's why it ended up that way. And then we can look at the systems and go, is there a way in which we can overcome that, even though in the historical sense it's been a bit of a roadblock. So if we end up at the same place, that's okay. We just talk through it and see, okay, we look deeper into why that hasn't worked in the past, if it has been tried. So it's all about exploring the topics. Complex issues like this, there's never a black and white answer to it. It's always grey, and it's about how you actually then navigate the grey and be comfortable to move forward together, I guess. So, yeah.
Very well put. All right, then I guess we'll move straight on to the topic without any further deliberation. So, again, we're talking about rebooting society. We did last week part one of this discussion, where we kind of discussed the foundations of, okay, what are our principles? What are we basing society off of? What's our scenario? So we're just going to do a quick recap of that, just to make sure that we're all on the same page and we're all at the same level, ready for this discussion. So if I go back to last week, the scenario that we were operating under was that all electronic data has been wiped clean across the globe. We don't know what caused it, but everyone's now on the same footing, like all bank records, all identity, all history, everything is wiped. So that's where we're at. We still have buildings, we still have the same population, same environment. Everything else is still intact. It's just our data is gone. We were kind of limiting our discussion to within Australia. So we're both Australian, we live here. If we go global, it's going to be a bigger discussion. Even in Australia, it might be a bit big, but that's a little bit more manageable, and we'll work around that. If we need to refine the scope, we can also do that. But for now, we're just concentrating on Australia. We came up with a mission statement for our new society, and that is that we want every human being to be reaching their fully realized potential and to live a fulfilling life. So that's our goal, our objective in rebooting society, and what we'll be measuring against ultimately. We agreed that we have some basic human rights, such as everyone has the right to food and drink, security, shelter, health, and education. So we want to try and make sure that that's all in there. Once we've got that, anything above and beyond that is going to be up to the individual, and they can follow that up to them, completely their choice. It's in their hands at that point. Some things that we said are going to be off limits. Murder or death penalty is like, so murder obviously bad, but also as justice for someone who does who does commit murder, we will avoid the death penalty. We'll find another way around that. And then another one that we didn't really know exactly how to communicate this, but it was something like the mass accumulation of personal resources. So we can't have one person that has 90% of the resources. It's got to be a little bit more evenly distributed. Not perfectly evenly distributed. Some people can have more, some people can have less, but we'll see how that turns out, as long as it's not one person that has the majority. Some principles that we wanted our new society to operate under. We wanted transparency, honesty, agency, and which means you have your own free choice. You can make your own decisions, which when you've got transparency and honesty is you're in a position where you're capable to do that, we believe. And then accountability also for your choices. So if you do something, you got to pay the price. If there's a price to that, if there's something bad happens to that, bad luck, that's, you made your decision, you got to pay that price. But then also compassion. So we recognize that we are imperfect. We do make mistakes. Allow people to make mistakes, allow them to make up for that, and then move on and show that compassion between us. And then some additional things that Mick and I had discussed prior to our last podcast, but we didn't actually discuss on the podcast, was we're going to operate from the assumption that we have enough resources to last us a year. So we don't have to rush out and do everything right away. We can actually take the time to sit back, think about, okay, how are we going to approach this? How do we want to structure society? We've got enough where everyone's fine, everything can manage for a year, and we've got some time to figure things out. And okay, that pretty much covers it. Anything that I missed, Mick?
No, I think you covered everything well. There would be one thing I would add is that, the wiping of data and the clearing of everyone's records and everything, we understand that it's a little bit abstract. There might be some holes in how that happened, but really it's just setting a scene to set the discussion. Anyone out there that knows how the end of the world would work is probably pick holes in what we've done there, but it's important to just set the discussion up. That's basically what it is. Even that year, you've got a year worth of resources. Someone might come in and say, well, how do you manage the people in that year? We're okay, that is a problem, but we don't want to actually get caught up in this point in time, because there's probably a lot of value in the discussion once you get past setting that scene up. So just noting that there might be holes there, that's all.
Yes, very good point. Thank you for bringing that up. That is something that I was thinking about as well when I was thinking about this. There are certain holes. If you had to deal with it in that rigid structure, we would have to approach it a lot differently. We'd have to think things out there a lot differently. But yeah, it's a little bit rough, but we're going to, that's the basic assumption. Some things might change, but that's all right. That's not really what we're focusing on today. Okay, so for this discussion, we're going to talk about a bit more practically. Okay, what are some things that we try and do to in the physical world, because the other ones were a bit more abstract. And in order to structure this, what we're going to go based off of, and this is an idea that I floated to you, Mick, the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So anyone who knows psychology will be aware of this. It's kind of like these are in order what you need in order to get to a point of self-actualization. So when I edit this, I'll try and put in a picture here that shows them, but basically it goes from the base layer. So the first thing you need covers your physiological needs. So this is stuff like air, food, water, rest, shelter. Then next up is safety. So this comes to your personal security, health, protection against other people. Then after that is love and belonging. On top of that, esteem, self-actualization. So today we think that that's a lot to cover. So today we're just going to concentrate more on the physiological needs and possibly safety if we have the time for it. But so more those base things like air, food, water, rest, shelter. I also want to mention that this kind of structure of going from physiological, safety, love and belonging, esteem, there are other thoughts out there, other guides on how to reach a self-actualized or fully realized state as a human being that kind of follow the same thing. So one of them is the 7 chakras system. So people who are aware of that there'll be some overlap they'll notice possibly between the hierarchy of needs and the chakras. And that's kind of that's why I thought, okay, there's a few different examples out there of getting to self-realization and they all follow a very similar pattern. So how about we approach structuring society in that way where we put priority on those things that are first in those in that guide, and then like as we go up, less and less priority. And then that way you've got a strong foundation. So if any of the top of things, anything up above starts to crumble, that's okay, because you've got something to fall back on, and then you can always build your way back up from there. Does that sound all right, Mick?
Yeah, that sounds good. So basically today it's really about discussing the foundation and ensuring everyone can actually live, at least live, get the necessities that each human needs to begin with. And then I guess in subsequent discussions we'll look at elevating that and getting that extra level of quality of life later on. So that's kind of how we're approaching it, I think, isn't it?
Yep, correct.
Yeah.
So I've been doing a lot of talking. I'll let you talk in a minute, Mick. There's just a few extra things that I want to cover off. So we're going to start with, like Mick said, get the basic stuff that we need to actually live and survive. So we're going to start with our physiological needs. And when I was thinking of this, I've been hearing a lot lately on a few podcasts. I don't know why it keeps recurring, but this rule of threes for survival, where you've got 3 minutes you can survive without air, 3 hours you can survive in a harsh environment, 3 days you can survive without drinking water, and 3 weeks without food. So it goes air, security, I guess, security/shelter, water, food. So I think that's the approach we're going to take. That's the order we're going to approach things in. And so the first one in that is air. So Mick, I've been doing a bit of talking, so maybe do you want to kick us off with, is there anything related to air that you would say we need to focus on while we're rebooting our society?
It's a good one. It's probably easily overlooked because it's such a basic thing that we think that we have already. But maybe the discussion isn't necessarily access to the air, but the managing of the air's quality. So I think actually of recent, there's been a lot of talk around the quality of air within indoors and what that actually means to humans and how that can impact their health. So I'm far from any expert of what air quality means, and I probably wouldn't even know where to begin about what factors actually a detriment, but maybe it's some discussion around managing the quality of air and how we all come to try and to come to some level of agreement to have to look after the air in which we breathe, whether that's within a building or outside with pollution as well. So I guess where do we start? I guess where we start is, we probably need to find the measure of air quality, whatever that would be, and then monitor that. And maybe that's, my lack of education now and my education about understanding what Coca-Cola is, I can see where the priorities have not quite lined up well. So I probably know a lot more about Coca-Cola or soft drinks than I even know about air. But maybe it's to start with that education. How do we monitor the air? What level of air quality do we want? And, how do we achieve that not only outside but inside buildings? Maybe I'm giving you more questions than than ideas.
That's all right. I mean, that's the whole learning process. Is by the end of it, there was a really good quote, and I can't remember how it goes, but the basic idea is that you come out knowing more than you did, but you have more questions than previously as well. So that's perfectly fine if you have more questions afterwards. I think you're right. I mean, there's 2 areas that I was going to focus on with air, and one of them is kind of like a bit more dictatory, like telling people this is what you got to do, but I'll get to that in a minute. First, I'll just say that you're kind of focusing on, okay, let's keep our air clean. Let's focus on how we clean up, maybe measure it first, see how bad it is, if it is bad or not, and then focus on cleaning it up and maintaining it at a level that is better or more healthy for us as humans. So I think there are technologies out there like you. I'm not an expert on them, but obviously the most basic technology that we've had for thousands of years is trees and plants.
Yes.
And so is that, when you talk about this kind of stuff, is this something that we do on a local level, like we get each person to contribute to this, or is this something as a city or a state, country that we do on that level? How do you see that?
Good question. I think you made a good point too, is that yes, there's a lot of vegetation in the world that vegetation cleans the air. And our lack of education, again, in that area as a whole, I think as a community is probably lower than where it should be. So I agree with that. The second part to that is, yes, I do think that it's valuable that everyone contributes to the maintaining of the quality of air, whether that be, like you said, we have some level of responsibility about actually having plants around us. So if you take new development areas, for instance, new development areas, it's all the main objective there is money and for people to have a home. But unfortunately, throughout that process, because it's so rushed, they just basically scrape the land completely, remove any vegetation, and then start again by building. And then they've got to wait maybe 10 or 15 years for the new area to boom up with the vegetation of some established plants and trees and all the rest of it. So I think a process like that should be almost and not accepted. Now, I don't want to say, again, it's like you don't want to go down the path of dictatorship, but I think if we have a focus and education on what air quality is and how to achieve it, and then we give some kind of ability for people to be proactive about how they can contribute, I think that sets up a much better environment than what we currently are. So, like I said, I'm completely void of really any knowledge of air quality and how to achieve that. I do know, like you said, that it gets filtered, just like our water gets filtered through the rivers. Our air gets filtered through the trees. So that is definitely an important focal point. And I think everyone can contribute to that in some form, whether that's actually them having their garden in the backyard or the ability for people to measure the air quality where they live even and contribute data points to an overall look. Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. I like the low-tech solution. Obviously, we're talking more about plants and trees. There are higher tech solutions that I've seen where they have like scrubbers in cities that take in the CO2. And I don't know, I guess they just clean the air. Again, I'm not an expert, but I have seen them around. So yeah, I'm a big fan of low-tech solutions where possible. The thing I wanted to mention while you were talking about that, a lot of what we're going to discuss here, even though it's focusing on our physiological needs, it's actually a lot of it comes back to education. And even when looking at this and thinking about it myself, it's like we really need education about it first. So even though I don't know if education is a higher level on that pyramid, or even if they consider it at all, but yeah, I want to make it clear that like in each of these steps, I'm kind of like advocating for education on it first. I think you might be the same. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I think so. While it might be a part of, like you said, in that hierarchy of needs, it might be a higher level need. I think even at the lowest level, there's got to be some form of communication or education, whichever way you want to describe it, whether it's people communicating between each other or educating. I think that it's still the same thing. We need to be able to talk through these things and gain some fundamental knowledge if we're going to then have to bring that into our community. So, so, I can't even think of a period in my school life or whatever that we've ever really talked about air in any depth. And I think that's a missed opportunity. And I agree with the low tech too. I think that, sure, in a city we can actually get a scrubber and technology to resolve it. But the city in itself has caused a problem. So even if you resolve a problem with technology, the underlying issue still exists. That the planet was meant to actually have more trees. It should have been more evenly distributed. A big concrete block in the middle of a planet is not of value. It doesn't take in its natural surrounding environment. In actual fact, this is something that I did. Opened my eyes. I went to Singapore a couple of years ago now, which seems like a lifetime considering our current environment. But I was really not looking forward to the trip to go to Singapore, and I think it was because I had preconceived notions about it being. I've heard so much about its shopping and its lovely first world sort of luxuries on offer, and I never really noticed that it was actually known for being such a green city as well. And what I think when I went there, what they did well is every building has greenery somewhere on it, on the rooftop, growing off the side of the building. And maybe it's not quite, it still needs to be shifted more to the natural environment a bit, but I really like where they're trying to achieve a balance between, the architectural living that we're so used to, but not removing the natural environment with that. Because if you go into Melbourne CBD now, it's most areas that are built up, it's lacking any real natural environment. It's often very superficial.
Mm. There's something you mentioned there that brought up in my mind. There's a book that I'm reading currently. I think it's called A Hunter-Gatherer's Guide to the 21st Century. And in it, they talk about this story. I can't remember. It's called Chesterton's Fence. And the idea is that there's two people walking along a road and they realize that there's a fence in the road. And one of the guys is like, and neither of them know what the fence is for. And one of them's like, oh, let's just remove this fence. And the other guy's like, hang on a second. We don't know why this fence is here. Why do we want to remove it before we even know what it's there? Like, we don't know what it's doing, what's its purpose. So it's kind of like with the trees in the cities. It's like we remove the trees without realizing that actually they're cleaning our air, they're doing things. So in our approach to rebuilding another society, maybe we should do the same thing. We should consider, okay, why is this here? Why is it like this? Otherwise, yeah, we might do more harm than good.
Yeah, I would agree. And I also think that what we're trying to do is have the least amount of human impact on the surrounding natural environment. So I think at the moment we don't really take that into consideration because we're all about get it in now, and at whatever cost, whether that just tears I mean, obviously they do, they try to do environmental reports, but I would say in a lot of circumstances, it's almost a corrupt reporting system. Its goal is to actually make sure that construction does go through with its protections, that it hasn't done anything to the natural environment around it, rather than the other way around, that it's meant to actually maintain the natural environment at all costs and then accept building in certain locations. So, yeah, I would definitely think that we want to maintain as much of the natural environment as we can around us, and that we're trying to adapt ourselves and fit ourselves within it rather than just remove it because it's an annoyance.
Yeah.
like your example said. So
yeah, I mean the whole thing of this book is that we evolved over thousands of years longer, and there's reasons that these things happen, that some stuff stuck around, some stuff disappeared. So to just like think that we know better than evolution is just hubris, and so we should pay attention to that first. And yeah, like you said, don't go looking for an excuse or a way to justify what you want to do. Go in curious and see, okay, is this something that we want to do first?
Yeah.
All right.
And what impact? Sorry, there was one last thing. I think also what impact you have. So like we have a decision, how can we get what we want as quickly as possible? I think it should be approached as, this is what we want, how do we do it with the least amount of impact? That's a different way, and that usually takes a lot longer, and so we just have to be a bit more patient, accepting of that that can occur.
I want to continue with air for just a little bit longer. Like I said, cleaning the air and monitoring it is one big thing. But then on the personal level, and again, this comes back to education, and it's a bit more dictatorial on my part, is to say that everyone should learn how to breathe and how to breathe properly, and what the effects of like certain ways of breathing has on your body. And because in a lot of cultures, especially you look at Eastern cultures and that, they realize that air is life, is energy, and that being able to control that is very important to being able to get to a fully realized being. And in order to maintain control of ourselves, like a lot of the time we just take it for granted. It's an autonomic function. I think that's the right word. But the other thing is, like, even from a neuroscience perspective, is that is the only autonomic function that you have manual or physical control over. I think that's right. And this would come down to education a lot more so than mandating anything. Although I would like to mandate that everyone does like a yoga or a tai chi or something that involves concentration on breathing, meditation, that kind of thing. But just education around, okay, this is the correct way to breathe. This breathing in this way helps to amp you up. Breathing in this way helps to calm you down. Breathing in this way helps you to get to sleep, or whatever it is. Like, there's various practices, and I'm still new to it. So I will admit that I'm still learning a lot, but I've been doing it for a little while now. And just, ever since educating myself about it and putting it into practice, my life has been far better. So that's something that I would try and concentrate on with people, is to just educate them about breathing, the importance of it, how to do it. And then, just encourage everyone to daily incorporate that into their lives. So does that sound fair to you, Mick?
Yeah, it does. I never even thought of air being that part of it. But I do think that, early on in the childhood, I think that learning how to breathe is of massive value. Because if you think about it, it's probably really our internal clock. Like, that's our internal clock to make our body work, to pump the blood through the system and control certain reactions in the body and everything like that. So being able to slow down that clock or speed up the clock and get your body into a particular state is probably going to be of real value. And I think that, and what I do like about that, if you learn that from an early age, not only will maybe you get some patience and some calm about yourself, but you'll also learn the value of one of those natural elements that we need, which is air. So it makes more sense that if you teach someone about how to breathe and what the breathing does to your body, then it seems natural that when we come to the topic of air quality, that people are going to have an vested interest. If you remove that knowledge, then it's sort of like, okay, we need good quality air, but why? How does that really impact us? So I think we've got the why and the what now, which is you need both in order for people to change their behavior, I guess.
Very good. I think we can move on from air now. Spent a good deal on it. It is something to prioritize. Like I was saying, like the survival rule of threes, you can go 3 minutes without air, so it's going to kill you first. So why do we put so little little of attention on it? Maybe that's something we should pay a bit more attention to. All right, our next one, if we look in terms of what's going to kill us first, harsh environments is the next one. So I'm guessing we can kind of frame this around shelter. Shelter, clothing, that kind of things. Just keeping ourselves away from like extreme heats, extreme colds. So do you have any thoughts on this?
I do. Where do I start? So, so obviously that takes into account shelter. But there's something before I want to talk about is that temperature control and regulation. I think if we think about those trees again, so trees are very important to obviously clean the air and regulate the air quality. But trees are very good at actually maintaining temperature in harsher environments. So, one thing I always noticed, again, I'm going back to the development area as opposed to an established area. One thing I have noticed is whenever I have lived in a house that's a more established area, the temperature of that house varies. The range of the temperature varies quite considerably. So like in a really hot day, if it's a 40-degree day, the house is like, if I don't have any air conditioning on, it's like at 30 degrees. And the opposite's true as well. So like when it's really cold temperatures, the house changes the really low temperature quite easily as well. And I think that when I've ever been in an established area, that temperature range doesn't fluctuate as much. So the house, those trees sort of protect that house and regulate its temperature somewhat. I don't know if that's true on the cool side. I'm not 100% sure, but that's my anecdotal feeling about it, is that whenever I've lived in an established house, the temperature outside hasn't impacted me as much as when it's not surrounded by that natural environment, the trees and everything. They do definitely offer cooling advantages.
I wonder if, that's a really interesting perspective, and I wasn't even thinking of it from that angle, so I'm glad you brought that up. I wonder if what you're saying is, and again, not an expert, the materials that we say to use to build up a city or a suburb and that, I wonder if they are more, I'm guessing it's conductive is what I'm looking for, than natural, like the ground, trees. water even. I know water takes a long time to change its temperature, so like it's more resilient to fluctuations in heat and cold. So yeah, I'm wondering if being around those natural elements, they actually just take a lot longer to change their temperature. And I can't remember what the terminology was for it. But yeah, I wonder if that's what's going on. Does that sound familiar to you at all?
It makes sense. Yeah, it makes sense. So like the induction, wood's a really poor inductor. That's why you can walk on hot coals, because it doesn't transfer the heat quick enough. So, but it absorbs the heat. So whereas if you've got, I'm going to the opposite extreme, but a lot of roofs that are colorbond roofs, they're the best thing to actually attract the temperature. So, and glass is another one of those. Like if you have big glass windows, obviously there might be special coatings that reduce all of this, but you take the property of glass in itself, it's a very good inductor of temperature. When it's hot, it absorbs all that heat and you can actually feel it. And when it's cold, it does the opposite. So yeah, it's the building materials definitely have an impact. And to reduce their impact, I think that you surround yourself by other materials. And trees are probably one of those ones where it's combined. It's a combination of both wood and water, and both of those have slow induction rates. Like the temperature in those change over a long period of time. So that's probably why they absorb a lot of the temperature around your home.
I think the term I was looking for is specific temperature. I'm not too sure about that. I would bring it up, but I don't want to like kill the flow. But yeah, it's just how resilient is a material or a chemical to change? Like how much energy do you have to put into it to change the temperature? So going over what you just said, is it safe to say so? And I know they do this in cities now. They look at, okay, what do they think the temperature is going to be? And so they build around it or they design around that. I know we had some projects where we were looking into that a little bit even. So yeah, are you saying then that similar to with air, we look at, okay, adding nature, trees, plants around cities in order to maintain that temperature?
Yeah, I think so. So like if we think about how we deal with that today, we deal with it, let's get ducted heating installed, let's get air conditioning installed in our house. Everything's good now. I can control my temperature. I can feel comfortable within my home, but that comes at a big cost of energy. And the way in which we actually get that energy today is obviously has an impact on their own environment. So it's like one thing it is, yes, we need to regulate temperature in order for people to not only, I guess, to not die, but to have some level of comfort. And I think if we want to do that, then we should focus on what are the natural elements we can use in order to regulate temperature first, before we then go adding in everyone has an air conditioner, everyone has a heater or something. Because once we get that, then you still might need to have heating and cooling in the house, but I think that the amount of energy required to do that would be a lot less, and that's beneficial for everyone. So yeah, it kind of makes sense to do it that way.
It sounds like we're going to be spending a lot of this first year just destroying half of what's been built up before and getting back to nature a bit, which I mean, from my perspective is perfectly reasonable and fine. But yeah, some people may object to it.
Yeah. So I would say we want at the end of it less dense areas. So maybe CBDs aren't and suburbs aren't the way they are, because at the moment it's like no one's out here, everyone's in here. And it's not a very balanced approach.
Yeah, we've talked about it from a I don't know what you'd say. We haven't really discussed it from, okay, how would we distribute housing, or how would everyone have housing? Have you got any thoughts about that? Remembering that we are continuing on from what we have currently. Like it's just the data that's been wiped. So how do we actually, if we are remodeling things and making population less dense, how do we distribute the housing amongst us?
Yeah, that's probably one of the trickiest questions I think we're gonna face out of nearly everything we're going to talk about. The only way I can think of a starting point, at least, is that let's say we've had that end of the planet and basically, the data has all been wiped and we've got that year to go forward. I think the status quo in the initial instance is those that are currently within their houses sort of stay within their houses for the short period of time. And those without houses, we find houses for them to have to begin with. So that would be those houses that are not occupied. How do we actually practically do that? And ownership, that's a big question. I'm not sure that we want to navigate that through this discussion. That's almost a discussion, a full hour topic in itself. But what I would say is that I do agree that everyone should have access to a house. Is it ownership? Is it renting? I don't know. But we should come to some agreement that, and obviously a family of bigger size needs a bigger home. A family of a smaller size needs a smaller home. How you manage the sizes is another trick as well. Because obviously, if we're going off the fact that everything still remains the same, there's going to be people in mansions and then there's going to be people in units. And I think in the initial instance, we have to the only way I can think of trying to deal with that in the short term where people don't cause a riot is that you maintain your current situation for the immediate future. And at some point in time, like you said, I think we're going to basically reinvent the way in which we live. And that might be a task going forward. So something, I guess, that we haven't really, maybe we haven't brought up, but I think that all these human needs that we've got at this fundamental level, in some way, each person on the planet should contribute to those human needs. So with housing, when we come out of this year, or even during the end of that year that we're sort of educating and creating this structure, maybe it is that we start to build houses a bit further out and we migrate people to those houses, and that how you manage that the logistic is still, I think, something you'd need to discuss, and it's tricky.
Yes, it's a much larger discussion, I think, and one that would have a lot of anger on both sides between your approach, or I don't know. I can't find the words, but yeah, there's a lot of opinions that would be conflicting in that one. I was thinking while you're saying that, I'm like, it almost would have been easier if we just said that, okay, everything's been wiped, we're back to rocks and birds and nature, just like no houses, no technology, nothing. We're starting from that point, but we're starting from where we are, so we have to deal with that. I think, it's the problem to me with giving people houses, and because I think it's a good idea, and again, this is something we want everyone to have. And if everyone has those basic physiological needs taken care of, they're less likely to interrupt with other people or interfere with other people's lives and cause them harm and damage and stuff. The thing that you can't remove from any discussion like this is like human behavior and personalities, and ego as a big one. Like, even though we would give them a house, maybe it's in an area that they don't like, or maybe, it's too small, like comparing it to someone else. And then it's like, oh, well, all right, we'll make it all the same. And then you get down like a very dark path, if anyone knows where that's going. But again, that's a much larger discussion that we'd have to have. But that's where I think it comes back to like education and being content with like nothing really. Being content with, okay, all I have is not the clothes on my back and I'm out in nature. Even less than that, maybe. Like being able to say that this is more than enough. I'm being grateful for what you have. And that's like, I don't know. If you can get to that point, I don't know. That's another discussion entirely. How do you get people to be to that point? Because there's a lot to overcome there. But it seems to me that the limiting factor there is personalities and egos and wanting to be or thinking that they're lesser than someone else just because of what they have.
Yeah, there's still going to be individuality. So wherever you live, each individual is going to have different perspective about what they want as their place of residence and how that's set up. What I would say is, I agree. There's human behavior in there, and it's going to fluctuate. And obviously, it's not going to be. There's no ideal solution here, so it's going to be a bit rough. But I think the problem I think that we have now is we have set up an environment that creates extreme behaviors. Whereas if we if we're educating about, okay, making sure that nature's taken care of, which actually has a positive impact on us, then I think even though you're still going to get those individual differences, they might not be as extreme. So people might be less likely to want to have a massive mansion with pools and cars and all the rest of it once they start to realize the benefits of having a bush around them and living a little bit more minimalistic and enjoying the day-to-day activities that they undertake. They might not be then, there might be less, they might be in a more stable mindset that doesn't drive ego, that doesn't drive competition, that doesn't drive extreme acquisition of objects and materials and everything like that. So it's kind of having a bit of hope and faith that once you create this this kind of different perspective with the population, that those more extreme behaviours get reduced. They might not disappear altogether, but they'll be reduced, and it should be easier to manage through that point in life. But I think everyone should. The basic human right is, and I think we've got enough resources to do it, is that everyone should have some form of shelter. If they want it, because there's some people that don't enjoy that as well. So, there's nomads that just enjoy jumping from place to place and being outside as well. So,
yeah, that's the thing. We're just trying to make sure that everyone's got these basic things. It doesn't mean that you have to live at that level or you have to do that. It's like it's always there available for you, and then how you choose to live beyond that is up to you. Because obviously, like we were saying, like we're trying to get people to realize their full potential. That's completely different between every individual. So that's going to mean different things to different people. Some people that will be staying in one place, some people that will be traveling the world and seeing a whole bunch of different things. So yeah, it's just that, okay, we've got this baseline that everyone is given, everyone has taken care of. So if anything fails when you're trying to do something beyond that, it's okay. You've got something that you'll fall back on and you'll be safe. You'll be fine. You don't have to worry about that.
Mm. Yeah, that's what we want, isn't it? That baseline to fail. So, because at the moment, if you fail, this is the way I see it. At the moment, as a society, collectively, we've got enough resource to take care of everyone. It seems. Unfortunately, that's not currently happening because there's a very huge unequal distribution of resource. But if we can get back to a point where anyone can fall over and they still get those basic needs, you're not going to get the extreme emotional reactions of depression and anxiety to the same extremes that they are. And that's what you want to try and alleviate. If someone falls over, they don't fall over so much that they become homeless or they become where they can't get themselves back up again. Yeah.
I almost wonder if you were trying to actually restructure society, if you would do it in stages. So you'd concentrate on air first and do all those things, say that we were saying, and then see what the state of people is at that point. It's like, what do people want? Does this jealousy go away? Does this want for extremes go away? Does it slow down? And then when you go to the next one, it's like, okay, now we can deal with it at that level. And then maybe as you progress through those things, you actually realize that it's already eliminated most of the concerns that we have today. Like we're operating at a different footing as we implement each of those different areas. What do you think of that?
Yeah, I think that's right. Like so as we're talking about it, some of the things that happen, when you go through a problem, there's like a direction or a goal, but then how you actually achieve that's not really known until you get to that point sometimes. So I think you're right. Like you basically deal with the things that you need as they unfold, and then you reassess how people's behaviours change based on that, and then you might fine tune those tasks going forward. So, like I think what we can agree is that people should have at least some equal access to shelter. What that shelter is and all the rest of it would be decided more closely to when you actually get to that point. But it's very hard to be able to describe all the logistics because you'd have to go through the process a bit to figure out which is the best way to do it. But we do know that, okay, the end goal is that we want to get to a point where there's some kind of level of equal access to shelter because that's a human, a basic need, I guess, so that for security for people.
Yeah, I'm thinking at this point it'd be good to say that like we're discussing it from the perspective of, okay, given where we are at currently, how would we solve everything? But that isn't how things evolve, how technologies evolve. It's really a feedback system. So yeah, we make a change, we assess how what happened, and then we correct. So we've got some desired point that we're trying to get to. We make a change. Okay, it got us closer, it got us further away, and then we adjust based on that. So we really do have to consider it as this is something that we'll iterate on over time. It's not just set and forget. It's set, watch, change, adapt, all those things. And that is like the process of evolution and growth. So I don't know. I think that I just wanted to, because I have been thinking about it from the perspective of, okay, if you were just to do a one-off, how would you do it? But it's like, no, that nothing works like that. It's all, you got to do it and then assess it and then change it and adapt it.
I think the other important thing too is, again, it's one of those education things. If shelter's really important, are we all educated about roughly how shelter? I mean, we might not all have to be able to build it, but do we know how shelter's built? And what are the decisions that get made through building that? So part of it is also about the education and getting people understanding. And I think when you do that, you create the environment in which people can better navigate that area. So, maybe it is, as you're growing up, you learn how, build what building shelter, just the basic foundation of building shelter, like, make sure your roof is pitched so the water runs off, just the very basic things, I guess. And then it gives, because the other thing as well is that at the moment, building, you have to go through so many regulations, which I understand why. You want certain safety criteria of the building to be there, but it also creates a lot of barriers and blockages, which has an impact on accessibility of those buildings. So, like for instance, now you get one big block of land and everyone can build on that, and it can be in the middle of nowhere. It makes complete no sense to do it that way, but it's the most efficient way, and then just a set number of people come in and just follow the same process to do it. And the people that end up living in that home really don't understand how that home got built and why decisions were made and what benefits they get and values they necessarily get out of that. So maybe educating what shelter is and how best to build that shelter, maintaining temperature, like insulation, going through the basics as a younger person, that would really set you up in the future.
Yeah, it's really having more awareness about what you're doing and focusing on that rather than just doing it or relying on it's like the difference between, a chef and a cook, where a chef understands what's going on with the ingredients and why you're doing a certain thing, whereas a cook is just following a recipe. They don't necessarily understand what's going on and the interactions between it, where maybe we want to have, especially for these things that we place really low priority on, even though like you look at the different guides to how to live a fulfilling life, they're all like the bottom rung. This is foundational. This is what you should know. And we put like the least amount. Like, how much do we concentrate on air? How much do we actually concentrate on shelter and homes? It's all other stuff. It's all like status and jobs and other things.
I mean, so I mean, I was going to say, no, I think that led into something that I was thinking about, which is that, how we sort of said at the beginning that I don't know how we do logistically the homes, and maybe the best way to start off is that people just reside currently in their ones until we solve that out. But if each individual starts to learn how to build a home, then they can take the risks and the rewards by actually, maybe it is that, okay, you get this piece of land here, and again, there's probably, different pieces of land that are better than others, so there's still challenges there, but maybe this is your plot and you get to build the house how you see fit. If it collapses on you, you'll learn from that kind of thing. You'll deal with the consequence of that, and sooner enough, each family is going to learn how to build a home pretty quickly. You know what I mean? So I think, having that approach might be of value, because then each person's got some autonomy, and obviously there's a capital to build shelter. There's this big startup cost, but once it's built, the work's pretty much done. There's a bit of maintaining, but it's pretty much done. So maybe that's another avenue that we can think about how to roll that out.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it comes back to our principles there. It's like transparency. We're telling you, okay, this is how we recommend you build a home. Like we've taught
Yeah.
them, being honest and upfront about that, and then giving them agency. Okay, now it's up to you. You can go and mess around with it if you want to. You can take the risks, and then they're accountable for it. Like we're not holding your hand. It's up to you.
Yeah.
Maybe that is. Yeah, maybe it is more of a approach where it's just we educate them and then let it play out.
Yeah.
All right, we're getting a bit long, so I'm thinking maybe if we get into anything else, I think it'll take a bit too long to discuss. I mean, just from the discussion we've had so far, it seems more like we can't actually recommend anything or come up with anything before. Like you need to really just try it out and educate people and tell them, okay, this is the best result. This is the way that we know best to go about it. Give that a shot, improve on it, and then share that knowledge amongst each other. I don't know. Do you want to, I think we leave this one here, but maybe we come back to it in the future and continue going on them. But I think it sounds like either way, it's always going to come back to that like education about it first. So as long as you're focusing on those areas, and it's more about reprioritizing ourselves, where it's like focus on those basic needs first and make sure they are a strong foundation before building up to anything more. Yeah, do you have any thoughts about where you want to go from here?
Yeah, I think it's still valuable to go through each one. And I mean, obviously, if we're running out of time, we can take it to another episode. I think what I'm feeling is that we're building a bit of a framework. So it's not necessarily a practical answer about how you actually do it, but we're sort of building a framework and a space in which you would try to achieve it. So I think even today, like the quality of air, like I don't think I've really thought about that too much in the past, and the breathing and what it actually means to us. The water, obviously we think about water a lot. The food and the shelter, those kind of things. I think that building up a framework about what we actually want to achieve, and then just discussing how people might shift from that would set. And then you set up the practical aspects from there. So I don't think you're right. It's a bit difficult to actually start going through the practical aspects, but I think it's still valuable to show this is the framework going forward. Because what is the framework now? Like, what do we all focus on together? I don't know. The only time we do it's collectively with a government body, and I'm not sure that we get the best outcomes of that. Like, do we all focus on education and health and shelter at the moment and food and that? I don't know. So maybe this framework is to get people into a state where they're going to be better off moving forward, rather than actually giving them practical answers about how to go about it.
Yeah. Do you want to? I mean, it sounded really dismissive when I just said yeah, but I do agree with completely what you just said, and I think it is worth having the discussion around these things, even if it isn't a practical. Okay, let's implement it in this way. It's kind of a gives us a bit of direction. Like, okay, if we were to do things, we would focus on learning about it, and would focus on maybe these aspects that we already know that we're lacking a bit of knowledge in. Do you want to? We've got water and food left for physiological. Do you want to maybe keep going? I mean, I'm feeling all right, and it's all right if we go a bit longer. Do you want to maybe keep going and just knock those two off today, and then we can come back and do the next level another time?
I think so. It makes sense to round it out with them too. We can probably pull them pretty close together because they're both, consumed by individuals. They do have to be sort of harvested in some way. I mean, water is harvested from dams, and food's harvested from crops or groups of animals or whatever. So I think it's important to close the loop with them ones.
Yeah. Okay. Let's continue then on to. And let's go back to you can survive 3 days without water. And if we're grouping it together, you can do 3 weeks without food. So water is going to be our next important thing. What are some areas relating to water that you think maybe we should try and focus on and improve on in a new society?
Okay, so I think at the moment we've got access to water is fairly equal. Well, at least in Australia. I mean, there's a lot of countries where that's not necessarily the case, but in Australia we do. But one of the things that we do poorly is understand water management, particularly freshwater land, management. And while we're actually in a really good point in time, and each of us have fairly equal access to quality water, the future of our water, I think, is in question. And it's coming back to, I guess, we're going back to that education piece, I guess. And that, again, I think, we've got, what have we got now? We've got shelter, we've got food, water, we've got quality air, quality of the air. I think everyone needs to participate somewhere in these in order for us to achieve the outcome we want. So having more people involved in managing water is going to be of importance, I think. Yeah.
Managing in what respect? How managing how?
So if you think about the Murray-Darling River, that has been poorly mismanaged.
Do you want to explain, just for those who possibly aren't Australian or Victorian?
Okay. Yeah.
What the Murray-Darling
So
River
the Murray-Darling River is a river that goes all the way from in New South Wales. It crosses in through Victoria and ends up at the into the beach, actually, down in South Australia. So I don't know how long that would be. Maybe 1,000 kilometres or something. So it's one of our, I think it is actually our biggest river system in Australia. And it's been completely decimated due to two things. The first one is that there's been a lot of agricultural land that feeds off of that river system. And unfortunately, all the pesticides and herbicides that people have used over the years has washed into the Murray-Darling Basin, and it's caused a lot of algae plume and a lot of issues with the river system itself, killed a lot of wildlife in there and everything. And the other part is that the government's kind of, I believe, has privatised aspects of that and given unequal access to the fresh water, and has used it as more of a commodity to sell off than a commodity to actually manage. So it's being used, and what that's ended up in is that the river is in a really poor state. In a lot of areas it's dried up, in a lot of areas it has no natural life in it that it used to be there. So it's been poorly mismanaged. And it's been because the perspective of what water is it's something for us to take. And we just take it at will. If the water's there, we can take it. But the understanding of the cycle of water and, how it, a lot of times it ends up in the ocean, it gets evaporated, it ends up back on land through clouds, and, it gets filtered. There's a whole filtering process, and the ecosystem in the water keeps it clean and filtered. The surrounding environment actually makes sure that the water is still running there. All those aspects are complete, in a lot of circumstances are put at a low priority. And we're only got very short-sighted about our water. And it could be a really tricky part, because we do have water restrictions sometimes in areas in Australia. We've come to points where, you have level 4 or 5 water restrictions, which means that you have to you basically get fined by using too much water in those areas. And it's just been because it's poorly managed. You can't, so for instance, some of those restrictions is you can't water your garden. You can't, which is a bit detrimental, because now you can't manage the natural environment around you because of other impacts that we've had on the planet as well. So I think we've got the equal access to water there, but the management and the education around how to maintain good quality water year in, year out, it's not there.
It sounds to me like what you're talking about there is the learning about the life cycle of water. And this is something that I would extend to everything that we do, is that we don't really focus on the entire life cycle. So specifically there, water, food is another big one where we don't really pay attention to, okay, where does it begin? Where does it end? But this is something that businesses, like, I don't know to what extent they do it, but I know in university they teach us, always pay attention to the life cycle, from like transporting it to, getting the raw resources to, like the whole thing, you need to pay attention to it. But a lot of the time we, as individuals, we just see it as how we can use it and then how we dispose of it. And that's pretty much the limit of our understanding of the life cycle of it. So that's something that I would pay attention on for everything, really, like air, shelter, water, food, everything we've talked about so far is, where does this come from? What are we doing to it? How are we using it? Where's it going afterwards? And then what's happening beyond that? Because like you said, like pollution is a big thing, and it's more than just like dumping chemicals from a factory process. It's also from the agriculture, from the pesticides, and what impact that's having on the rivers and the lakes and all the waterways that we have. I like you're more concentrated there on public water, not public, like natural water resources. What about like collecting it as individuals, like everyone having a tank, say, in their house? What about that kind of stuff? Do you have any opinions on that?
Yeah, I think the ability to have your own, it's actually a good point. I think the ability to have your own, some form of water management locally for yourselves is always an advantage, because, even, people that are in bushfire areas, they do this a lot, because obviously it's a form of protection for where the environment which they live in. If a bushfire comes through and the pipes are all cut off, then the ability to still to protect their home during bushfires there. So managing your own water is definitely good. And I think one of the other things that I probably glossed over as well is understanding the minerals. So like water that's captured from one particular area isn't necessarily equal to water that's caught in another area. And that really does base on where you're geographically located as well. So understanding what minerals are, what your surrounding environment is in, where the water naturally goes, and what minerals are valuable because of that natural cycle. And then how can you look for opportunities where you live to take advantage of that? So maybe, and the reason I said that is it might not necessarily be a rain tank. Maybe a rain tank is a good thing for collecting water, but it might be, some kind of form of dam or rock dam or whatever within your backyard that might be a more valuable approach too. So, I think looking at those options and figuring out how you can best manage that in your area is going to be of value.
Yeah, and I think that's a very important point that you made at the end there, that it depends on where you are. Obviously, if you're close to a water source, then it's going to be a bit easier than others who are far away. And maybe that's even something we consider with shelter. Maybe we are living too far away from these resources that we need to survive. So maybe that's something to consider with that. I think, you made a good point about there's not all water is created equally. I can't remember exactly. I think it's total dissolved solution or something is the measure that they use, or total dissolved nutrients of the measure of how much nutrients are in the water. And some of them are far more beneficial for us to, say, drink versus, use outside on garden and that. So that's something that would be interesting to look into and educate people about. I was actually thinking about this the other day. We're not going to cover it here, but like energy is obviously a thing that we will probably want to consider. I mean, electricity is pretty good. Everything that we're doing now, like this whole podcast, is all powered by electricity. So it's something that we need to consider. But and this is something I'd have to look into, again, not an expert, using water to store energy. Because I was thinking, because we got solar panels recently, but we don't have a battery for it. So it's just going back into the system. So I'm like, what if each person could buy something that it's like a motor that pumps up the water to a certain height, and then whenever you are lacking energy, it releases the water and it turns a turbine or something. So you use that as your battery source instead of, just what we'd think of a battery, a lead acid battery or something. Now, obviously, I don't know the efficiencies of doing that, but just thinking of other creative ways to use water. I mean, historically, it's been used. If you were living on a river, you put a what do they call it, like a water mill in. That's infinite energy there. Like, you don't have to pay for anything there. So there's various ways, and we've used water for many things. Like moving objects is a big one that we don't place too high importance on. Like, yes, we use boats and stuff to travel around the world, but I mean, think of this is something, again, I heard on a podcast recently. One explanation of how they got the pyramids, how they built the pyramids, how they moved the stones from one area to another, was that they built tunnels of water, and they used that to offset the weight of the the stones. Because if you get something in water and it floats, all you do is push it. You don't have to put a lot of energy in it, and it's going to move. So using water in a novel way. Is there anything else you want to add on for water? Otherwise, you can jump straight into food, I think.
Not really. I think that moving of things is very interesting. It's true. I've watched a few docos where they do the same thing in when they're getting wood from forests as well. So they'll cut down all the trees to get their forest, and they'll use the river to actually transport the logs down the stream, and then they'll collect them. So you're right. I think what I would say here is, as we go through all of these, I think what we're learning is that basically, or this is how I'm perceiving it anyway, is that currently the way in which we approach it, we don't consider the natural environment around us first. We consider it last. And I think almost what's happening now is we're flipping that so that the natural environment's considered first before we actually do anything else, which is a much more probably harsher way to approach living. You're not working against it, you're not fighting it. So like at the moment, like I said, at the new development zone, the whole natural environment's stripped to back to bare bones again. So it's not considered. And what we're doing is now considering it and educating people what it means too to them. Yeah.
I love that. I love considering the natural environment first instead of like last. Instead of working against it, work with nature instead of against it. That's
correct. Yeah. Yeah.
That's going to sum up everything. That's how I'm going to end it. But before we get to that point, food. What are your thoughts on what we do for food?
Well, I think in a lot of ways it's similar to water, but there's probably 2 points that I'd like to expand on food. Is that I think we're not well educated about how food grows and how it gets the nutrients and and how those nutrients are important to us. So I think nutrient sort of how food's grown and what nutrients it has is one thing. And then I think the other thing is that we need to relax ourselves from perfect crops. So one of the biggest challenges I think we face on the planet today is the way in which we build crops or manufacture food. And the way we do it is we say this square of land has to get the most production food out of it for it to be valuable. So therefore, pesticides and herbicides are acceptable in order to get the best value of that land without considering that, okay, you know what? I'm going to do this land, but there's enough there that if 20% of my crop gets eaten or taken away, we still have what we need, and we don't need to protect it with such extreme chemicals or in such extreme ways. I think we need to be more accepting that food is not grown perfectively, kind of thing, if that makes some sense.
Yeah, I'm taking some notes here because I don't want to forget things. That you brought up pesticides, yes, that's a big thing. And I like the way that you describe their usage so that you want to use this land and do a certain thing with it. So you're, again, working against nature instead of with it by adding these pesticides. And then I don't know if you were going towards this, but like monocrop farming, where it's like you're growing a single thing. Let's consider what effect that's having on, because I know a lot of people say that there's certain number of yields left in the soil because of how we are doing the monocrop farming. So yeah, let's have a look at what effect that has on the foods that we're producing.
We also work. So we also work against ourselves with food. So like, the monocrops is a really good example. So think about where monocrops are grown, right? And the surrounding land around it is often completely stripped of a lot of the natural environment. So there's no wonder that you get mouse plagues in this monocrop that's sitting in the middle of nothing. Because the mouse go, okay, there's nothing in my natural environment. I'm going to this monocrop that's just a rich source of food. Now, if we're more equally distributed about how we build our environments, they might not necessarily even have to go there. So I think there's a problem where we've stripped a lot of natural environment. So then animals come to the zones in where we are doing controlled growing and then sort of raid that. And then we kill them off because they're raiding that area. But the reality is they've been forced to go to that area because their natural habitat's been killed and a lot of their food resources been stripped as well. So it's sort of this fine balance that, yes, we're growing food for humans, but we have to accept that the wild animals around that area need food as well, and that we can't just consider that you just eradicate that. That's our current solution is, oh, okay, animals are here, shoot them, kill them, or herbicide and pesticide, some way, kill them, you know? That's working against nature again. That's not practical. It's not practical to just kill everything because you want it perfect cropped. You have to accept the imperfection of nature and run with that.
Yeah. Again, working with nature, not against it. You're focusing, I mean, I like that you're focusing on the actual production of food, but that also says something about the diet. So one thing is, and this is really, I got a friend, I can't remember, he's a teacher, and he asked his students, like, have you ever walked into a supermarket and they haven't had whatever product on the shelf? And like, no, what are you talking about? Like, we don't understand that, you know, there are times in your life where certain products won't be available. Maybe there's like no bananas or no apricots or something because of the season. And this is something that is cool that we can do this, but we have certain fruits and vegetables. And I want to get into like produced food in a minute and the diet, because we're just mainly concentrating on fruit and veg. But we have access to these things all year round when that just doesn't happen in nature. It's like, where are these things coming from? And maybe they are because they're being transported from other countries, and even there, they still have to, like, they're growing these things all year round. So they're doing things to maintain them, like you said, like destroying the wildlife around there or adding pesticides. So I think one thing that would be good if we could get to more of a seasonal diet where we're concentrating more on, okay, it's wintertime, these fruit and veg grow in winter. Let's concentrate our diet more on using those instead of trying to force something that only grows in the summertime, like say a watermelon or something.
That's brilliant. I'm really glad you actually brought that up. I didn't think about it, but there's two things that I can think of that are really valuable in that. The first one is if we get people to go with the natural cycles that are seasonal, that is actually a beneficial to the human psyche. One of the things that we get comfortable with is that we get what we want when we want it and how we want it. And that works for a while, but then when something goes wrong, people are less prepared to deal with the shift. Having to do this year in, year out, having to go through seasonal cycles will force people to adapt. And that is definitely a valuable attribute for a person to have. And the other part is, yes, so you're right. At the moment, we can get any food when we want it and how we want it almost. I don't think anyone really understands the cost of that. So while we can do it, there's a significant cost to pay that's not obvious, I think. So some of the things are like we've talked about, the monocropping, the shipping, all the rest of it. So if you were to, let's say we're focusing on the education component, maybe the education component is obviously about the diet and the nutrients, but also about your local environment. What grows there? You know, what naturally grows in your environment, and how, again, working with nature, how do you best cultivate without causing too much damage? And it makes sense. You're not fighting it then, are you? You know, like, so what if you don't get strawberries in this environment, but you get apricots or something? Just accept that and adapt yourself towards it.
Yeah. You said, I mean, even there you gave an example straight up of something that most people wouldn't consider. I hadn't considered it, so it's really cool that you thought of it. The effect of immediate gratification, the fact that we can do this, people are less likely to be are less patient because of it, or that might be contributing to it. That's just something that you wouldn't normally attribute to having access to a certain food year round, but that might actually contribute to the psyche of each individual. So yeah, that's I like that. It's really cool that you brought that up. Going back to like life cycle, as we we're talking about with water, understanding like what we can do with the food once it's done, like composting it, even growing foods. Like some things you get and they have seeds in it, so it's obvious, okay, you're going to use these seeds to grow more. But some other things I look at and I'm like, there's no seed in this. How did they grow? And then like this is something that I want to get into personally, a bit more understanding where the food comes from and how we grow things. But a lot of them actually go to seed. So if you leave them in the dirt long enough, they'll actually grow the seeds on their fruit or vegetable. I think it's mainly the vegetables. I'm not an expert. But yeah, understanding, again, coming back to the education of where food comes from and how it comes. Like you can't just take everything from the ground. Some of it you have to let it grow so that you have seeds for next time. And that's, again, goes to the life cycle and maintaining it and working with nature.
Yeah, you're right. Like lettuce, I don't know how lettuce reproduces itself. For instance, I think it's I don't know if it's a bulb plant or whatever, but yeah, I think vegetables, isn't it? Vegetables, the ones that basically don't have seeds, and fruits, the ones that have seeds generally.
Possibly,
so,
I'd have to look
yeah,
up it. I think
can't
lettuce
remember.
goes to seed. I'm pretty sure I've seen them.
Does it? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So you just leave it out there long enough, and it grows a shoot out of it with seeds in it. But
yeah, right.
Again, I might be wrong.
Yeah.
I'll come back to me in a year's time.
Yeah.
When I'm an expert on
You're a horticulturalist. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, but I mean, definitely educating people where their food comes from, how it's grown, and I think having a local scope on that's very important too. So like, there's some things that we obviously like. Even buildings, probably there's some local scope to that as well. But some things are going to be more general to the biggest section of the population, like air quality, I guess. And other things are going to be more local, like food, I think is very local. And if you can adapt yourself to go with the cycle of your local food production, I think the planet and us would be a lot better off than us trying to fight it and go, I want avocados, even though they're grown in, where is it? I don't know, Brazil or South America or whatever, and they get shipped over. It's kind of like, okay, yeah, that comes at a big cost, Do I actually need to have avocados, or like you said, am I just self-gratifying?
I think you were saying there with local, like we can do more community garden type stuff. Like even imagine in a city complex or like a building, well, what do you call them? Like an apartment complex. Imagine if you had one level where it's just a garden and everyone that lives in that complex can come and contribute to that garden and pick from it and whatever. I mean, that's, again, it comes back to behavior, but maybe by the time you get up to water and food, you've taken care of so much that people are more generous, more willing to share with others. So it'd be something that you could try out and it might actually work. Another thing is, like, a lot of people I don't think have actually eaten fresh fruit or veg like from their own garden. I think that's a pretty novel experience. For me, it's I've been around people who have their own veggie patch and fruit, and so I've had it ever since I was young. But I think there are a lot of people out there who haven't actually had it and don't realize that there's a big difference between it. And the main thing may come back to, again, those pesticides and the way that we farm it, and even like having to send it across the world because it's not local. You need to store it or pack it in some way which diminishes its nutrients and its flavor. And maybe that, like, even just giving people an experience of fresh fruit and veg will be enough to also convince them to start growing it themselves and look more into that. And you could even extend this to higher levels on this hierarchy of needs, which we've kind of gotten a bit away from. But like, it's a good social thing as well. Trading, it leads to trading and sharing between people. Like, not one person doesn't have to grow every single different type of fruit or vegetable that is possible in their location. It's a good way to share. That's like something that we do a lot. Sharing between families. It's a good community thing. It brings people together. And then even cooking and eating, like, there's such benefits to getting together over a meal as well, psychologically and socially. So there's a lot of things in food that I think we take for granted that we could look into. Is there anything else regarding to food that you think we should mention?
I don't necessarily think so. I think, like you said about the having a community garden, I think, yes, you're going to have some problems about who gets what, but got to remember that if we're working towards a less individualistic environment, people are going to be less anxious about getting what they need. So, people accumulate when there's anxiety or fear that they can't get it in the future. If they feel confident that it's going to be there, they're not going to go taking a whole lot of it to begin with. So, I think as we shifted away from having this individual mindset and that we all agree that we contribute somewhat to these basic fundamentals, that anxiety and fear that you can't get it is going to be reduced. It might not be completely gone, but it's going to be reduced. And therefore, those events of someone just taking more than they need from a community garden is going to be reduced. It's going to be mitigated. But yeah, just working with the natural environment and learning, like you said, even just the cooking, like there's so much social benefit to preparing meals and then sharing it with others. And you're right, like some people have maybe never really tasted fresh fruit. They've tasted it at the supermarket or whatever. Even to an extent, like, a lot of people use microwaves. There's some people that just live with a microwave and don't have a stove and stuff like that. That's another thing that I would say is that processed foods, yes, I think there's still maybe some value to processed foods, but they shouldn't be front and center the main choice.
That's something. Yeah. Sorry to cut you off there. I just want to say that's something that it's good. I wanted to come back to that before we tied it up or finish it off. Yes, processed foods. So let's think about like you said, it's probably good to have in a supermarket. Kind of invert it. Like currently, it's like what would you say? Maybe 60% processed, 40% whole foods. Does that sound, or maybe even more of a disparity?
I'd say more. I guess the grey line is: do you consider, some of the canned vegetables or fruits being processed or not? But yeah, I'd say if you don't consider those tinned fruits, it's almost just the veg, the meats, and the fruit, and maybe some peanuts and stuff like that. So I'd almost say, if you look at it, it's almost like 70%, 80% of the food's processed.
So if we could invert that, I think that would be a good start. Do you see, I mean, for me, I'd get rid of them all because I don't really eat processed foods anyway. So, but I understand that there might be some value in that. What do you see as the value of still keeping around some processed foods, and which ones would you keep around?
Oil's one of those ones, I guess. So oil has so many valuable benefits to when you cook. So for instance, if you want to have something that's a bit char-grilled or something like that, you need oil, I guess. So I don't know what extent processed foods might be. So, some oats, wheats, things like that, I guess they've got to be processed at some form to be consumed. Maybe flour is one of the benefits. Obviously there's an argument with gluten within there, but they've been around for centuries and they've provided a lot of value benefit for humans. So I don't want to go to the extreme extent to say you get rid of all processed foods, but I do think it needs to be reduced considerably, and I think it's because not only for our own health. It also comes at a high cost of energy. So it doesn't make sense that you use a high cost of energy to then, in a lot of circumstances, impact your health in a negative way. It doesn't make sense. So you probably want to reduce that. Obviously, I think that there is some benefit, like, having there's something about humans where, like, say, for instance, that char-grilled thing, there's a sense of pleasure that you get from having something like that. But you should be able to pretty much live without processed foods and have that as kind of a bit of a luxury, I guess. So maybe it's not a basic need, but we still need to consider it in the future.
I wonder if you could look at the process and say that's how you distinguish. Like anything that you can just chuck in a microwave and heat up is probably not great. I think... No. I mean, from most of what you were describing, I wouldn't even really call most of that stuff processed, although I guess it is. But like, it's anything that's not recognizable I guess, from like something that you could pull out of the ground or off of a tree, I would say that's probably going a bit too far. Like, yeah, you could, with flowers, it's pretty easy to connect between the grain that they came from, or with oil, it's pretty easy to connect that came from, say, olives or whatever, the different flowers that you can get, different types that you can get. But I don't know, something more, and I don't eat processed foods, but I'm guessing there's stuff that, you know, that's put together in a factory that, I guess, like biscuits and stuff and chocolates.
It's got like 30 ingredients.
Nice. Yeah.
Maybe define it. It's got 30 ingredients. It's processed. I don't know.
Yeah. There'd be a limit to the number of ingredients. You can have like 5 or 6. Anything beyond that is too much.
Yeah, if you can't start to pronounce what's on the back of the packet, there's cause for a question.
Yeah. I mean, diet's another big one in itself, but so I think we've covered enough in terms of from this perspective of creating a new society or rebooting society. Is there anything else you want to mention before we wrap up?
Not really. I think while the talk didn't really go in the direction that I thought it was going to go, I kind of feel like we've actually got a better outcome. I feel like what we've learned from this is that we actually work against nature in a lot of ways. And that's only going to cause a rift. And that maybe if we change that perspective where we're working with nature a lot more seamlessly, we wouldn't have such rift and such angst that we do today. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a really good way to put it. And I think the fact that I'm actually glad that it didn't go the way that we had planned, because that means, I don't know, it was more fun doing it this way than trying to pigeonhole it into the direction that we wanted to. And that's the whole idea, again, of this format and this direction and space. It's just like, okay, we want to end here. We don't care how we get there. We're just going to let it unfold. We're going to act, but we're not going to judge the outcomes. We're not going to feel bad if it didn't go exactly the way that we thought it would, because we have confidence and faith that it's going to end up where we want it to go. And again, getting back to what we really want out of this is just to discussion, just open, thoughtful discussion, and how do we go about that best. And the topic, again, even though it's fun to speculate on these things, we're not giving any advice or recommendations. We're just discussing the topic and seeing and thinking about how we approach things and how we discuss and how we communicate amongst one another.
Yeah, definitely. It gives you that example. You know how we were caught up on, which one was it, the shelter one? And you had to work. We got to a certain point where you go, okay, now you'd have to actually do it to figure out some of the solution. It's kind of what's happened today. So you sort of see that we started off with some rough goals or objectives about what we were trying to talk about. But because we just let it unfold naturally, it shifted its direction. And at the end, you get something, because you went through the process, you get something that you didn't really envision at the start. And I think that that's what's cool about being able to just discuss it and not always be hell-bent on a particular solution or a particular path. It just allows it naturally unfold, and then those opportunities start to arise, and you're like, oh yeah, okay, that's like we've said, okay, we really are working against nature at the moment, and we wouldn't have saw that before having the discussion. So yeah, that's probably what I've taken out of this. I've learned out of this today.
Very well put. I'll just mention once again, like you said, consider the natural environment first, and like if we apply that to life, I think we'll be a bit better off. All right. So my supplemental song suggestion for today is, this was actually a bit difficult to find one that really fit the topic, and it may be a little bit off topic, but that's fine. It's still a great song, so I recommend going and listening to it. The song is called Cardboard Castles, and it's by Watsky, Watsky. He's a great artist. It's a great song. Go and check it out. And then my quote for today, again, it was a bit difficult to find one that really fit in with the topic, but I think it actually is pretty apt after our changing discussion today. And it's, the only constant in life is change. And it's by Heraclitus. I think that's how you pronounce it. Okay. We just want to, once again, thank you all for joining us, and mention this is just the beginning of a discussion, and we really like people's input. So thanks for joining us, and until next time, be well.